On 8th of August 1942, 6 German saboteurs were executed in the District of Columbia jail by electrocution. 2 others who were cooperative and provided information about their mission were sentenced to life and 30 years in prison respectively. The trial in front of the military tribunal was quick and they were found guilty. All of them. Who were they? And who planned their mission? How was the plot uncovered? This is the unbelievable story of the Operation Pastorious. The attack on Pearl Harbor had changed everything. When the United States entered World War II, Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the German Military Intelligence Service, was forced to act. Although for a long time he and the German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop opposed taking any actions against the US, but they couldn't resist Hitler's wish anymore. Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect and Minister of Armaments and War Production for the Third Reich, wrote in his book that the Führer was fascinated with the vision of New York in flames. Adolf Hitler's offensive plans were backed by Hermann Göring, the head of Luftwaffe, German Air Force, and Heinrich Himmler, the second most important person in Nazi Germany and man in charge of the SS shock troops. All of them demanded actions from Canaris. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris believed that any sabotage actions against the United States would be counterproductive. They could only bring short-term gains, but the long-term effects could be disastrous for Germany. After America's official entry to World War II, he couldn't resist Nazi pressure anymore. The result of Hitler's demands was a plan masterminded by Walter Kappe, a man who used to be a propaganda chief of an American Nazi organization, the German-American Bund. Walter Kappe joined the Abwehr after coming back to Germany in 1937. He had lost the fight for power in Bund and decided to return to the homeland after spending 12 years in America. He was a loud man and Hitler's loyalist, one of the first 100,000 members of the Nazi Party. Kappe was the main man behind the Operation Pastorious. He wanted to create a network of saboteurs who would terrorize and damage light industries in the US. The trained saboteurs would be transported by submarines to the American shore. Rear Admiral Karl Dönitz, who was in charge of the submarine arm, was very reluctant and skeptical of this idea, but he backed down under the pressure from the Nazi Party. Walter Kappe personally selected candidates for the would-be saboteurs. Their training commenced in an Abwehr school near the town of Brandenburg. For the outsider, the camp located on the shore of Queens Lake would look like an ordinary farm, but there was nothing ordinary about it. The barn-looking building contained classrooms, a chemical laboratory, and a gym. There was a shooting range, concrete pits for high-explosive training, a set of railroad tracks, and anything else the would-be saboteurs could need for training. Who were the candidates chosen by Kappe? The first, and a very important candidate for the future of the mission, was Ernest Peter Berger. He was a volunteer for intelligence work. He was living in the US for 6 years before, and consequently, his English was very good. Although he never got rid of a strong German accent, he used to serve with the Michigan National Guard. After receiving honorable discharge, he was granted American citizenship. In 1942, Berger was 36 years old, and from the moment he decided to go back to his homeland from the United States, everything had changed for him. Even readmitting into the Nazi Party didn't save him from imprisonment by the Gestapo. His wife miscarried because of them, and Berger deeply hated Himmler and the Gestapo with all his heart. When he was finally released, he told Alfred Rosenberg that he wanted to volunteer for foreign intelligence work. His details were passed to the Abwehr, finally reaching Lieutenant Walter Kappa. When he was contacted and informed that he would be expected to carry on sabotage acts, he insisted that he was still interested in the mission. The second person was a man mainly responsible for the failure of Operation Pastorious. His name was George John Dash. It was decided that he would be the leader of the first team of saboteurs. In 1942, Dash was 39 years old. He spent 12 years in America, mainly working with the public, where he picked up a variety of slang phrases, which he liked to use a lot. He was also addicted to playing cards, doing it every spare moment he had. Although he sounded like a convinced Nazi, sometimes he was unable to keep the mask on, especially at the sabotage lessons, in which he had no interest at all. The man chosen to be the leader of the second team of saboteurs was Edward Curling. He had been living in America for 11 years. After the war started, Curling and his mates bought a yacht, the Lekala, wanting to sail across the Atlantic to offer their services to the Third Reich. Of course, they were intercepted by the Coast Guard. Curling was a true Nazi, sincerely believing the war was already won for the Third Reich. In his opinion, America was steered into the war by a group of Jews. Curling considered some of the candidates as completely useless, complaining about them, especially about Dash to Walter Kappa. The other candidates were Herbie Haupt. Herbie Haupt was the youngest member of the sabotage team, as he was 22 years old in 1942. He grew up in the US, living in America since the age of 5, and his English was better than his German. He enjoyed his previous life, being especially interested in girls and money. Richard Quirin and Heinrich Heink were the first candidates recruited for Operation Pastorious, and Quirin was Hitler's follower and keen supporter of a Nazi regime. Hermann Neubar. He was described as a gangster type. He was wounded on the Russian front and had an American wife. When he decided to go back to the fatherland in 1940, she was against it, but finally, she decided to join him in Berlin in 1941. Werner Thiel was recruited after coming back to Germany in 1941, where he arrived after traveling via Russia. He had been living in America since 1927, initially working at the Ford Motor Company in Detroit. There were over 10 trainees, but only 9 made it to the final stage of their training. The 9th one, although one of the most promising candidates, was Joseph Schmidt. He was a tall, blond man with blue eyes. He was very strong, and he was an excellent shooter. He was reserved, but he had a hot temper. His past was mysterious, but it's believed he was working as a trapper and hunter in Canada. That would make him the most dangerous amongst the trainees. Their mission would be to sabotage railroads and the light industry on the East Coast. They would be looked after and trained by the Abwehr specialist. The training subjects would include chemistry, using high explosives, operating secret devices as well as secret writing, gymnastics, wrestling, and many more. All the would-be saboteurs were given new identities, but the attention was focused only on making minor changes to personal details. Only their surnames were changed, while dates of birth were changed by about 5 years in each case. Some of them, like Berger and Haupt, were allowed to keep their real names, while the other ones were told to pretend they were Polish, Lithuanian, or even Portuguese. The men were expected to pass the final exam on April 29th. Their task was to sneak to and blow up different targets in the training camp, manned by guards and protected by additional traps. Most of the would-be saboteurs failed miserably, but Kappa pronounced this exercise as a success. The following day, Kappa gave saboteurs a list of targets in America, mainly aluminum plants and transportation links. Carl Donitz, although initially very negative, had agreed for the saboteurs to be transported on board his submarines. After arriving at the destination, they would be dropped on shore by the U-boat sailors. Dash and Kappa were appointed as group leaders. With the exception of Curling and Schmidt, all the candidates seemed unsuitable for the mission. It had been decided the 9 saboteurs would travel on train from Berlin to Paris, and 2 compartments were reserved for them. The journey lasted 20 hours. When the train finally arrived at the station, they were greeted by a local intelligence operative and taken to the hotel. Having money given to them by Kappa, they then showed just what a miserable bunch they were. Heinck got drunk and very loudly claimed that he was a secret agent. Haupt refused to pay a prostitute, and the other agents had to pay the money for him. Even Kappa had to admit his men were only interested in spending money and chasing girls in Paris. Not very good material for secret agents. Finally, when they were transferred to Lorentz, they were placed in the hotel, normally reserved for the U-boat sailors. Curling, Haupt, Neubar, and Thiel were put on board U-584. Joseph Smith complained that he'd caught an STD while in France, and after being checked by doctors, it had been decided to not let him board the submarine. Kappa, though, insisted on sending him to America, as he was the toughest member of the sabotage team, but it was decided to send him to Berlin for treatment instead. Finally, the second group, which consisted of Dash, Berger, Quarin, and Heinck, were put on board another submarine, U-202. After departure of the U-202, Captain Lieutenant Wilhelm Ulrichs of the Security and Intelligence Office of the German High Command, who was dealing with the V-men before, met Schmidt on train to Berlin. He admitted he did not have gonorrhea. He wanted to avoid this mission so much they decided to inject his penis with soda solution.